How do you determine when it is time to do the probate? What is probate?
Probate is what happens after somebody passes away. And any assets that you have that are in your name, in order to be able to transfer those assets, gift them away, or to sell an asset, you have to get authority, legal authority, by someone on behalf of the estate. You need somebody appointed to be able to sell or transfer those assets. So there are two types of probate. One, when somebody has a will, okay, that's actually called probate, and where you're looking to have someone, an executor appointed on behalf of the estate. Then you have in surrogate's court what's called an administration proceeding, and that's when you pass away without a will. Mm-hmm. All right, and then New York State has a pecking order as far as who inherits your estate. So if you do not have a will and you have a wife and kids, your wife, this is the husband passing away, would get the first $50,000 of your estate, and then half of the remainder, and then the kids get the other half. And then the question is who's in charge. The court would naturally say it would be your spouse, but sometimes maybe the spouse is not capable, and then you have kids fighting over who wants to be in charge. I also have seen a situation with a young family. They were in their 30s, and the husband had passed away and when they had tragically, and there was a 2-year-old. And everything didn't go to the wife because there was no will. The wife had the first $50,000 and then shared the remainder with the 2-year-old. But because the 2-year-old was entitled to now get a share of the estate, they had to pay a guardian to be appointed, another attorney, who then had a right. Their interest was protecting the kid's share until he turned 18. All right, so the spouse had to post bonds when they were in order to protect his share. If they were selling the house, they had to get the guardian involved. So the court basically had a say in all the decisions she made until her son turned 18. Wow. And if they would have had a will, that would have avoided all that.
At what point do you see people are skeptical about really putting it all together? Do you notice that people are just trying to avoid that idea? And why do you think it is?
Well, the costs. Okay, it's a sort of a morbid conversation, and people do not want to think about what happens if I die.
Right.
Some people don't want to make those tough decisions as far as who's going to be in charge. Sometimes if you're married, you don't see eye to eye with your spouse as far as who is going to be in charge of your assets. I do have, where couples will reach out to me to put everything together, and they never come back because they can't decide on who's going to be in charge and who's getting what.
Wow.
But it's important because then you're leaving the two families to fight over everything if something happens to both of you. So this is really to protect really your family, sometimes your assets, and, to avoid confrontations after you're gone. But people do unfortunately procrastinate and sit on this. Also with trust, there's a 5-year look back period, and I get many people who do not want to give up control of their assets, but yet they want to preserve their assets. So it's, the whole idea of now if I'm setting up an irrevocable trust, I'm not prepared to give up control. And then they come in when they're sick, but there's a 5-year look back period, and it's too late at that point. Liens can then be put on their property.
What is 5 years look back period?
So the 5-year look back period is, so if you either put an asset into an irrevocable trust, or even if you create what's called a life estate deed, another way of transferring your primary house, after 5 years, if let's say you need Medicaid assistance, they cannot put a lien against that asset because it's no longer considered an asset of yours. All right. So what you're doing is you're transferring that asset into a trust or transferring the house to your kids. And then after 5 years after you've done that, they cannot put a lien against that asset. So you're preserving the asset that you worked so hard for over your lifetime for your family.
When do you think is the best time to plan?
When you have kids. Okay. Personally, I never had a will before I got married. I figured if something happened to me, my parents would get everything under New York state law. If something happened to them, my sisters would get everything. Then once I was married, I said, oh, my spouse will get everything. But then once kids are involved, that's when if something happens to you, it could get complicated. As I mentioned with the story earlier, now the court's involved in every decision the surviving spouse is making because they're preserving an asset for a child. So I think when you have kids involved, that's when you really need to put together a will, think about life insurance. Trusts can come a little later. A will should be once you have kids.
So you think that at the hospital during the childbirth, everybody should have a will?
Then you want to celebrate life. But I think a short time after that, you should start thinking about putting together a will, what happens as far as who's going to raise our kids, who's going to manage their money if something, God forbid, happens to you and or your spouse. And life insurance is important at that point, too, because something happens to you. It's very expensive to raise a family. You need to think about your surviving spouse and, like I said, in the event there's a tragedy, how are they going to manage? How are they going to pay the bills and raise the kids?
I joked with you earlier that every single person at the closing table, just like we sign agency disclosure and lead disclosure, right? Every single person, when they purchase a property, they should definitely right away at the closing table have some sort of understanding that what happens if anything happens to me, to the property I just purchased, because it's not a joke. It's a very significant purchase that people make in their lifetime, right?
You're 100% right, and sometimes that's the biggest investment they make in their lifetime. And you'd be surprised, or I get asked that question a lot. And a lot of people, when they say after real estate closing, all right, after I finish moving in and getting set up, we are calling you to set up a will. We need to plan what happens if, God forbid, something happens to us.
Right.
Who's getting what, who's going to be in charge. And I handle a lot of real estate. We're both in that same
Correct.
Industry. But a lot of the estate work I get comes from our real estate clients because, as you said, they're buying a house. It's their biggest investment. Now they're thinking, okay, what if? Okay, I need to have a plan in place.
It seems like a lot of people just don't want to think and talk about it on what ifs, but
Yes.
like you highlighted.
A lot of people are very uncomfortable.
Very, very uncomfortable. Why do you think that topic is so uncomfortable?
Because people don't like talking about dying. A lot of people like to focus on positive, not
The negative.
not the negative. And they don't want to, they're, I don't know, maybe in denial that we're all going to meet that same fate at some point. I know it was something that when I first started doing this, I was even uncomfortable talking about. Now, I talk about it like it's second nature just because it's what I do and I've been doing for over 25 years. But it's talking about death is I think just human nature. A lot of people are uncomfortable talking about it.
Have you met cases or had cases where it became super complicated because people were just not into it and procrastinated tremendously, that it affected financial, emotional, spiritual, destroying families' peace? I have a lot of cases like that, which is even scary sometimes to see what money can do.
Yeah. I'm not sure if any of those clients are listening, but yes, I have prepared many wills and trusts for people, and they've just never executed them. And they have come back after a year or two, and they say, all right, we're going to do it, and they update it, and then they don't want to come in. So a lot of people are just afraid of making that, for whatever reason, that final decision.
It's tough.
It's tough for a lot. I know for myself, after I had kids and I did this, I felt a great sense of relief. So for anyone listening now, it is a big relief to get this done and to have that check mark, on this box of things to do. And I almost feel like in karma, you do this and, it's a good thing to have this planning done and get it out of the way. But there's a lot of people who are, for whatever reason, they have a lot of reservations on making the final decision and finalizing this.
Do you think it's the costs involved also? Like
I do.
Maybe it's expensive for certain people?
I do. And a lot depends on where you go to have this done. But yeah, there's definitely a cost factor for a lot of people. But you have to think about what you've accumulated over the years, what the value of your estate is. The cost to prepare this is very small compared to what you potentially are transferring. And if you don't set up your estate correctly, you can lose a lot of assets you worked hard for and have to pay that over, to the government, or spend money on a nursing home rather than getting the assistance you could have gotten if you would have set up your estate properly. So it's well worth the expense.
In your opinion, David, do you believe that inheritance, it could be a blessing or a curse for some people that they can't even manage to handle because they don't have the finances to sustain and pay the taxes and all expenses while they have to upkeep, let's say, the property?
Well, okay, so that's two questions. One, it could be, yes, both a blessing and a curse, because some people, I've seen this tear families apart when you don't have proper planning and you're not taking into consideration that maybe there's one child who's lived in the house for a long time and has never been out on their own, but you have three other children who are entitled equally to the estate. So without proper estate planning, I have seen families split up as a result of that. So that's why it is important, obviously, to plan and protect your family and have think through what the situation is within your family. Does everybody get along? Have you extended gifts to family members outside during your lifetime? Is there a resentment there? So these are all things that I think you need to take into consideration and plan out when you go and meet with an attorney.
Do you feel that when people have children, it shifts their mind to think that they need to care about their estate planning? Have you noticed that this changes their thinking after they have children?
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of people that...
Like procrastination before?
Like myself. I procrastinated before.
Right.
And then once I had children, I just felt maybe the sense of being a parent. And now all of a sudden you have to care and protect for others and not just yourself. So yes, I have seen that once a lot of young couples will come in and at least put together a will, and sometimes even a healthcare proxy and a living will, which is a directive for somebody to make medical choices on your behalf if you're unable to. But yes, I see a lot of younger couples doing that. But then also as you get older and you've accumulated assets and you're thinking about, okay, what do I what is my family? What do I have? Then people do start thinking about, all right, I need to now plan. What if something happens to me? It's very important to have this set up. You're doing a disservice, I think, to your family by not having it set up. Now, I'll say this. Even cost-wise, if you're concerned about cost, there are ways you can protect your family without doing a will and a trust, and that would be to have people who loved ones you intend on giving assets to, named as maybe a joint owner or a beneficiary on an account.
You're talking about putting their name on the title.
Putting a name on a title to a house. Preserving a life estate, which also preserves the house. That's a whole nother story, a topic. There is also, let's say you have investment accounts. You can put your kids or a child as a beneficiary and it will pass to them automatically. It won't even go through the will. So there are many people who realize that and sort of plan who gets what during their lifetime, and the will only catches what's left in your name when you pass away. Mm-hmm. And for many people who plan properly, the will doesn't really catch anything when you pass away because everything has already been dispersed to other people during your lifetime, where you've added a beneficiary or joint owner. So you always have to have a plan, really, of what, if something happens to me, who's getting what. Otherwise, you could be your family can be one of those news stories where, something tragic happens because the kids are fighting and somebody thinks they're being cut out or, I think people want their kids to get along and to remain a tight family during their lifetime. And if you don't put this together properly, you can actually cause your family to fracture. I've done many closings, not say many, but I've done closings where all siblings had to sit in separate rooms because there was such hatred between them.
Wow.
All over money.
They requested to sit in separate rooms.
We didn't even want to be in the same place with each other. And then you have spouses that come into play, they think their husband or wife should have been entitled to a bigger share, should have got credits for taking care of mom and dad. Other people who might have taken advantage and got gifts from mom and dad during their lifetime, they shouldn't get the same. So yeah, I've seen a lot of families break up after a parent's passing because they didn't properly plan their estate and determine who was going to be in charge and who was getting what. And there are also families that, let's say there is one child who has been giving a house and been giving substantial assets during their life, the parent's life, but another child who has never asked for anything. You can actually make those arrangements within a will too and compensate for that.